This episode of the Fine Homebuilding podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. If you're a window installer, you deserve a simple choice: Andersen 400 Series windows. They're the windows contractors trust the most, based on a 2022 survey of U.S. contractors. Probably because they have fewer callbacks and extra peace of mind. And thanks to shortened lead times, they're available faster. Make your go-to windows Andersen 400 Series. Request a quote at andersenwindows.com. Also brought to you by Loctite's PL Premium Max. Professional builders know the value of a durable and versatile construction adhesive. Say no to second-guessing quality. Say yes to Loctite's strongest adhesive, PL Premium Max. Equally effective for interior and exterior use. PL Premium Max can be applied in all but the most extreme weather conditions and bonds to all common building materials. It offers 20 minutes of working time and cures solid in 24 hours, with no air bubbles for maximum durability. Whether you're framing a custom home, upgrading to granite kitchen counters, or adding rigid foam and comfort to an existing basement, PL Premium Max is the right adhesive for the job. Say yes to Loctite's strongest construction adhesive. Visit LoctiteProducts.com for more information.
They're less expensive than the high-end professional brick cladding installers.
So to answer Guy's question, yes, it is faster and cheaper to not have an air gap, and you should absolutely always have an air gap.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding podcast, a regular discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Green Building Advisor Editorial Director Andrew Zellner.
Hey, Patrick.
Operations Manager for TDS Custom Construction Ian Schwant.
Hello.
And producer and small engine enthusiast Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at findhomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, it is a pleasure to see you guys this morning. Thanks for being on the show.
Happy to be here.
So, Andrew, you are in town. You were in Newtown visiting the Taunton campus, and I took the opportunity when you were in town to leave and go to Massachusetts.
You know, Patrick, I booked this trip, and you're like, hey, we're going to hang out the whole time. We got a bunch of fun stuff planned. And then you just bail, man. It's.
What have you been doing since you've been in Newtown?
I've been doing a lot of fun stuff. Meeting with the team in person, kind of hashing out plans for the next year. Across video and advertising and editorial. We also are always producing a magazine, so I got to talk to Samantha and Rodney in person and look at layouts with them together. It's super fun. I can see the appeal now.
Since lockdown, I miss that process. You know, in the old days, we used to pass around paper copies of layouts, and I think you'd agree it's a very different experience than looking something on a little screen. What did you think about that? Had you done that in your previous magazine gigs?
Oh yeah. That's how we'd always produce magazines up until everyone went remote. And I think especially in this sort of how-to building world, talking about illustrations in person with a physical illustration in front of you is like a game changer. It's so much easier to give feedback, to talk through things, to circle on the paper what you're talking about, label things.
I have a greater appreciation more recently for the craft of magazine making because I think it's an increasing rarity, and I think Taunton still does an amazing job at it, and I think, we should all be proud of the beautiful magazines we make. It is no small thing.
Yeah, I think, we were talking a lot about sort of what is Fine Homebuilding's value to the market. And more I sort of feel like as we're sort of preserving the truth almost, the amount of care and dedication that goes into creating something that is printed and mailed to subscribers. It's like a different level of care than can go into an influencer's YouTube video or an Instagram post or a TikTok, And I sort of feel like even just looking back through the issues of Fine Home Building, like you see the entire progression of building science. And
Yeah.
it's like the only place where you can see that now.
I had the pleasure to talk to Bob Goodfellow, who was, formative in shaping the look and information that went into fine home building for decades, and I would say had a huge influence on what the magazine looks like today, even. And it was a delight. So I hope you all will tune into that Pro Talk, even if you're not a regular Pro Talk listener, because I think it was super cool.
Did you do anything particularly New Englandy, like go to a dark pub with 7-foot ceilings that Washington slept at, or anything like that?
Probably the most New England things I've done are I'm staying at the Ethan Allen Hotel, which is next to, I guess, Ethan Allen's like corporate headquarters in Danbury. And the other very New England thing I've been doing every morning is I place my order for Dunkin' Donuts coffee on an app and drive through on my commute to the office in Connecticut. The one really cool thing, like being here right now, is I'm not sure if they're like pine or spruce trees on campus, but it smells like when I go to a cabin in northern Wisconsin, like when you just get out of your car in the parking lot.
Cool.
It's such a cool building and like campus, and the campus feels New Englandy.
Does the hotel have Ethan Allen furnishings in it?
Yeah, I bought my entire room suite. I just fell in love with it, and
You should have just loaded it into your car. Ian, what have you been doing?
My big accomplishment was getting the garage drywalled and bringing over a bunch of my shop equipment. I haven't gotten any of it set up yet, but it's all in the garage, which is a major feat in and of itself, moving machinery. So
Oh
I'm
gosh,
pretty
yeah.
excited.
are y'all wired up for like 220 volts and
I
outlets where
am,
they
yeah.
need to be?
Yep, I've got everything's wired up from when we built the garage, and just really excited to get all of that
So
stuff.
you taped all this presumably, right, as an air barrier?
I didn't tape it. I just I used craft face insulation. Figuring
You're never going to tape that now. Forget it. You're going to set up that machinery and
done,
never
yeah.
ever touch it.
I think the idea will be once we build our shed, then I can move everything from the garage to the shed, and then I'll tape the garage. So it's in stages of work.
That's never going to happen.
Probably not, but it's nice to think that it will.
Jeff, do you have any confidence that Ian will ever tape and finish his drywall?
I would no, actually, Ian, I think he might, but if it were me, definitely not. Yeah.
So the plan that I have cooked up is I'm going to see if I can get my good friend Mike Mulvey, Venetian plasterer to the stars and sometimes contributor to the magazine, to come and visit me and then bring his taping tools and tape my garage.
What did you call him?
It'll be
Venetian
a full-time
plasterer to
Sawyer.
the stars?
Yeah, that's what he is. I'm going to see if I can do a full-blown Tom Sawyer Busman's Holiday for Mike to get him to tape my garage.
Isn't that going to like catch dust? The textured plaster? Like, I don't know.
I'm just going to have him fire tape it. That's it.
So I was in Marblehead, Massachusetts, shooting a fine home building feature with Brooke Cambridge of BLC Painting, and we're going to talk about that later more in the after show. But I wanted to tell you all that Marblehead, Massachusetts is a terrible place. Don't ever go there. Don't consider buying property there because it's terrible.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that Fine Home Building is the official media sponsor of the Midwest Building Science Symposium. And this year, our pals Travis Brungart and Joe Cook at Catalyst Construction, who are the sort of curators and put on this event, are planning to host 4 of them throughout the year. So the first 2 are coming this fall. The first one's September 14th and 15th in Kansas City, Missouri, at Boulevard Brewing, and October 12th and 13th in Chattanooga, which Patrick is pretty sure is in Tennessee. And so Patrick will be at all of them. I'm hoping to be at all of them. Sounds like Ian may come out to one. So we're excited to be there. I think for the most part, they're 2-day events with a bunch of, fantastic speakers talking about building science and sort of this collegial and shared appreciation for building atmosphere that I always get so jazzed going to and coming out of. I feel like I have like 3 or 4 life-changing moments at every event I go to. And one of these times, I'm just going to quit my job and start framing.
Oh my God, don't do that. And they're usually a pretty good happy hour, I would add.
And we may be recording some podcasts at these events too. So
cool.
Yeah.
Jeff, do you have anything to share? Any exciting home projects?
Nope. Had a house full of guests over the weekend, so didn't really get anything done.
That's nice to have company, for sure. Well, as always, we heard from our fantastic listeners, and this comes from my friend Mark Jassome, who is a HVAC engineer. Boy, my lambasting of the HVAC industry has generated a lot of feedback. I haven't gotten as many emails since we had the subject of over-trucking discussed. He says, "Hi, Patrick and FHB podcast team. I was listening to episode 473 while commuting home this week. You got into a conversation about misconceptions about heat transfer and why even HVAC techs often lack a basic understanding of thermodynamics. I've lost count how many times I've had to explain the difference between heat and hot air, even to HVAC techs and seasoned building professionals. To be fair, HVAC techs, I've met just as many To be fair to HVAC techs, I met just as many HVAC engineers who don't have a clue about constructability and what it takes to put a system together and make it work. HVAC engineers need more field experience, and HVAC techs could use a bit more time in the classroom. Radiant heat, ducted systems, wall-mounted heat pumps, etc. all have advantages and disadvantages, and understanding where to use them and the best application makes for a happy homeowner. Asking an HVAC engineer to install your system might be just as dangerous as asking an HVAC tech to design a system. Getting adequate design support on residential projects is a challenge. There is a knowledge gap at the residential level. Here's another example of what the knowledge gap looks like to a homeowner. Recently, a friend asked me if baseboard heat was better than a ducted system for his new home. His installer said wet heat, hot water baseboard, is much more comfortable than dry heat, ducted hot air. I told him, you're going to get burned either way. This is another of my top 10 HVAC myths that will certainly have some of your listeners thinking, you mean that's not true? I offered to help him select a system that would be best suited to his application, and then he could hire a tech with the knowledge and tools to do a good installation or on the right system. I love the podcast. Keep up the good work. And if heat does start rising, we're all in trouble because the sun is not sitting below the earth. Mark Jassome, specializing in HVAC myth debunking. Oh my goodness, wouldn't you like that on your business card?
Have you had him on Pro Talk yet?
I have, yeah.
You have. I'll have to dig that one out.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize the name at first.
He's in the Boston area and does a lot of institutional and government projects, and talking to him was great.
So we're working on an article about ERVs and HRVs for the magazine. And
you should have him do a tech read.
Yeah, we should definitely have him do a tech read because we're all, trying to work through understanding of this. And so my favorite thing to do now is when someone has a question about it, just be like, well, it's just basic thermodynamics.
and all questions are answered when you say that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like your HVAC contractors know what they're doing, Ian?
Overall, yeah. I think I actually started this chain of events.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me.
Filled your email box with my heat rises comments, but overall, I think if you if you stick to the systems that each individual contractor specializes in, and just keeping their focus where they're used to having it, it helps out in the long run, as opposed
I think
to.
that's super helpful advice, but how do you figure out what their specialty is? Do you let them screw up a few times? How's that work?
We typically have been interviewing different contractors, but also we have longstanding relationships with some of the larger HVAC places, so that we have a good idea of what their specialty is. And one of the big ones that we use actually has different divisions within the company for forced air and heat pumps and hydronics. So finding somebody like that just on the surface recognizes the difference between those HVAC delivery methods, I think, is important.
Were you going to say something, Andrew?
I just love the idea of wet heat. I mean, is that what I'm experiencing in Connecticut, Patrick?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's been stupidly hot here is what Andrew's been is talking about. Yeah. And humid, right?
Yeah.
This comes from Kevin. Happy summer, Patrick and crew. I found this interesting read in the Boston Globe. I'm not sure to take the information about James Hardie siding from the local New England contractor. Seems like he may have an axe to grind, but I'm not sure. My folks have had 2 homes with James Hardie siding, and they've been very satisfied overall. Paint adhesion in a southern coastal area battered by a hurricane has 0 effect on it. The original paint job is still gleaming after 25 years. I continue to enjoy the pod and input from all the contributors. Kevin. So Kevin sent us a PDF of a Boston Globe article written by John Gorey, wall-to-wall coverage. And it's a kind of, we would call it a roundup in the magazine biz, where he talks about a bunch of different siding types and interviews people about their attributes and pluses and minuses. What did you guys think of the story?
I enjoyed the reference to the salespeople from Sears going door to door selling vinyl siding. I didn't realize that was a thing, but that I got a lot of entertainment value out of that part of the article. Otherwise, I agreed with Kevin that there's certainly a bias against the James Hardie siding by whoever they were talking to in that article.
Overarching thoughts, Andrew, Jeff?
I think Ian, nailed it on the head. Like there seems to be bias. So a few houses on my street have been resided in the last couple of years, and everyone's doing James Hardie or fiber cement. And everything looks great, and the siding jobs seem to go pretty quickly. But having tried to do a little bit of work with it myself, not being experienced with it, it can be frustrating if you're not, following the manufacturer's installation instructions. You're breaking a bunch of siding and having to redo work. I think having the right tools goes a long way too.
Sure. I think it's important for any journalist to think about the motivation of someone they're interviewing, right? So this gentleman is interviewing folks who are in the biz called replacement contractors, right? These are siding and window roofing folks. They probably are not going to get called to a fiber cement job that's performing correctly, right? They're going to get called to the one that's screwed up. Am I right about that? So this is some of the things that I thought was complete garbage. So this is, I should say, I'm not sure that this is accurate, I think is what I should say. John McDonald, who's the general manager of REI Roofing and Siding in Holbrook, Massachusetts, says cedar shingles last 20 to 25 years uncoated. Really? I've seen hundreds of year-old barns in Vermont that have uncoated cedar shingles, and they are doing just fine, maybe with modern construction methods, installed directly on house wrap or something like that, which you're not supposed to do. Maybe they rot quickly, but at a minimum, they're not all going to rot. It's going to be in the vulnerable areas, right? And one of the great things about cedar shingles is you can fix it. This is good too. Some fiber cement boards contain silica dust.
So Just some.
It's concrete, okay. However, which can be harmful to installers when they cut it to size. Okay, sure. I mean, there are protections for that. You have dust collection, you wear a respirator. And homeowners have had mixed results with the product. Certainty paid out over $100 million to settle a class action lawsuit alleging its fiber cement siding warped and cracked prematurely. I have read about this, and that is totally true. I don't think it's fair to paint all manufacturers with the same brush. These recalls have not happened at all of them. McDonald's says, we don't touch fiber cement siding. It draws a lot of dust, and the product breaks easily. So at REI, we choose not to use that product. Okay, there you go. So if you don't want fiber cement, don't call REI, would be my advice. What do you think?
It's like hard to blame a material for poor performance if it's truly not the material. It sounds like like I have my preference for what I like to work with, and so I'm going to promote that for my business.
Another contractor, Joseph Dans, president of Boston Exterior Remodeling in West Roxbury, said, in Middle America, fiber cement seems to hold up okay, but in New England, it just gets eaten alive.
What's eating it?
The salty air and the wet
Anyway.
heat.
The wet heat really, yeah.
I think it's, a challenge when the general media tries to cover construction, and it's...
They should just call you Patrick. You can be a source.
They are never going to call me after this diatribe, am I right? I think it's, it's important to interview the right people if you're a journalist.
You should also ask them what their profit margin is on James Hardy versus the stuff that they prefer to use.
I'd say it's hard to find the right people to interview.
I agree. Yeah.
It's like you can find the right people to interview, but like actually getting time with them and getting them to respond is like the hardest part about being a journalist.
Especially now, it seems to have gotten worse with the proliferation of influencers and remote work, right? It used to be I'd call a building products manufacturer and I'd get someone on the phone within seconds, right? Whatever we needed, but it's a lot more challenging now. Like leave a message, maybe they'll call you back. Maybe they'll call you back after the third or fourth time you've called them. This comes from Larry. Hey, FHB crew. As a true dyed-in-the-wool data nerd, I enjoyed listening to Patrick's description in episode 473 of labeling his electrical panel. Years ago, I drew a simple outline of the rooms in my 1925 bungalow for the purposes of identifying all the outlets, switches, etc. At the time, I simply wrote on a printout the corresponding breaker number. But after having a new panel installed to run my 220 volt to my garage, I realized I needed to up my game and finish the diagram correctly. I resurrected my copy of Microsoft Visio 2010 and created an accurate depiction of the walls, windows, doors, etc. of the house and then identified each outlet, light, switch, ceiling fan, etc. The PDF printout is attached. I then linked each element to the appropriate row in an Excel spreadsheet, also attached. Now I have a visual representation of all my electrical wiring, and I can quickly identify what will be turned off by each breaker. Was it worth the hour I spent on this? Probably not. But now I get to obsess over why breaker number 4 services 8 outlets and lights, but number 3 only services 2. Really enjoy. Keep up the great work you do. Regards, Larry. Larry, that's fantastic. I love how he describes it as a simple outline.
I'd like to see his complex outline of one of his house systems.
We absolutely have the best listeners. That is fantastic.
It made me think this is like the perfect thing to give to a guest when they come to your house for the first time. It's like, welcome to my home. This is how the electricity works.
I think Larry should try and get free Airbnbs when he travels by offering to do this for the owners of the Airbnb.
Oh, man. Can you imagine?
Just leave them a printout with all of the electrical panel information on it. It'd be great. Said it only took him an hour.
I think Larry and I are kindred spirits. Larry I think you should come over. We'll talk electrical circuitry, and I have the same problem. I wonder why I have more outlets on one circuit than another too. I should track that down. We can compare notes. This comes from Patrick in Tennessee. Hello, good folks at FHB. Patrick here from the outskirts of Memphis, Tennessee, in Millington. My wife and I have a 130-year-old plus hodgepodge of a home that's had several additions over its life. We're trying to get the ball rolling on a bathroom remodel, and we have a Federal Pacific panel in the bathroom. The wall used to be an exterior wall, but it is now an interior bathroom wall with this electrical panel. Obviously, this isn't the safest thing, nor is it up to code. So we should tell folks these have been recalled, I want to say decades ago. I want to say at least 20 years. My question is, should we tie this sub-panel into the outside main panel, which isn't going to be cheap, or should we have the electrical company turn off the area with a Federal Pacific panel into a junction box? We feel like we want to do it correctly and having it removed completely and tied into the outside main panel. I'm guessing over the years, each of the homeowners have opted not to move it due to the expense. However, we figure safety is the most important thing, and we really don't want to burn the house down. Thanks in advance so much for all the great advice and laughter. Podcast and magazine subscriber for life, Patrick. Well, Patrick, thank you for that. It helps keep the lights on here. What do you guys think? This panel's been there. It's apparently been fine so far. What do we do?
I think it's time to get rid of it. You're already doing a remodel. This is your chance. And one of the things that's always surprised me in my time of estimating remodel jobs is that replacing these types of panels really isn't a huge line item expense against
few $100,
the whole
right?
remodel. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people
totally
have this fear that it's a lot of money, and it isn't necessarily the case.
I think it would take an electrician less than a day, maybe a half a day, to do all of this. And why risk it, right? Yeah.
Especially if you're investing in your house in other ways, like it's very cheap insurance.
Yeah.
I knew that these panels were an issue because we've run across them on projects before and had them replaced, but until I actually Googled that Federal Pacific, I didn't realize the extent to which they can heat up and melt down and cause fires. And
do you have any details of like how many of these things are out there or were out there?
I didn't see anything like that, but I've been on at least 3 projects that I can recall that had these, and they were almost always in bathrooms behind like a mirror or some other odd place inside the house.
I just have to wonder if the home inspector, in a real estate transfer didn't see this, because I know they always flag those in home inspection reports because it's a problem. Jeff, you got any thoughts on this?
Other than it's absolutely got to go.
There, you heard it. Question 2 comes from Shane. Good morning, Fine Home Building team. I'm in the process of building a mother-in-law apartment in my unfinished basement, and because of several electrical junction boxes up in the floor joists, I'm unsure what to do about the ceiling. We'd like drywall, but we'd like a drywall ceiling, but to do that, I'd have to rewire a substantial portion of the basement to remove the junction boxes. I did just have my electrical service upgraded from 200 amps to 400 amps and had a second breaker box installed, so this isn't outside the realm of possibility. My wife doesn't like drop ceilings, but will understand if we don't have another choice. I've been told about a recent trend which involves painting everything in the joist cavities a flat black. I've seen similar treatments in commercial buildings with exposed ductwork and such, but I don't know how it would look in a residential basement space. Are there any other options that I'm missing? And any don't do it this way warnings? Kind regards, Shane. Well, to answer I'll go quickly, don't do it this way warnings is don't just drywall over the junction boxes, right? That might sound obvious to folks, but I can tell you in my remodeling work, I've found many occasions where there are electrical boxes buried in walls and ceilings. So, any other feedback, Andrew?
I mean, Patrick, you always say drywall is cheap. And And so when I think about like preserving access, there are ways you can like have access. You can create your own access door in drywall that like doesn't look terrible, or only put drop ceiling in certain parts of your basement. Because I'm doing a lot of work in my basement right now, I have been relocating electrical wires into sort of like a main run cavity, so I can preserve access there, but be able to finish the rest of my ceiling without worrying about it.
So you're taking a hybrid approach. You're moving
Yeah.
some stuff, but not removing everything.
Yeah, I'm not removing everything. I'm moving all of the stuff into one central location, hopefully in the laundry room, so it can be unfinished because it'll be relatively unfinished space anyway.
Is the plan for drywall and the rest of it?
Yep.
Yep. Ian, what do you think?
I think Andrew stole my thunder. I mean, he's got it figured out. I would add the trend of painting those types of open ceilings. I don't think that's that great of a trend, because how do you keep that clean? It's still going to get all cobwebs and dirty. Just because you painted it, that's not going to make a difference. And it sounds like you'd be painting over all of your electrical boxes and everything that's already in those cavities. I would do exactly what Andrew said.
The other thing I would mention is if you're truly trying to have it be an apartment, putting some sort of insulation in between the basement and the first floor, unfaced, but more for sound attenuation than anything.
Resilient channel would be even better. So you're going to take these like aluminum, or they're steel strips, right? And they run perpendicular to the joists, and then you fasten the drywall to that. And it's got a very small point of connection, so it tends to decouple the drywall ceiling from the rest of the house frame, which is good at transmitting noise. I'm thinking maybe move it if it's not too much trouble, right? It's like get it out of there, drywall the whole thing, get on with your life.
But know that you can have a fallback of using access panels if you reach something that just is too much work to move, and just paint over the access panel the same color as your drywall.
Mm-hmm.
The like pre-made access panels that I've seen in primarily commercial spaces are real low profile. They're meant to be a fire barrier, right? I don't think they're inexpensive, but what is?
I think the basic ones are pretty inexpensive. The ones that you're thinking of, the fire rated ones, are very expensive, but I'm not sure that you would need anything more than your standard plastic big box store access panel for that.
I think you're right.
So the other thing that struck me about this question is upgrading from 200 amps to 400 amps.
Yeah, what's he doing down there?
That was my question.
Why not is what my question. Why not have 400 amps?
So like that was going to be my question. Like right now I have a 100 amp service. I'm planning to upgrade it to 200 amps.
Why stop at 2?
Yeah.
I think Shane might have an electric car as an example.
Okay.
You're going to need 50 amps for that alone, right?
He may have an electric on-demand hot water heater and a Tesla, each taking a 60 or 80 amp breaker.
Shane, don't stop at 400. Let's go. We can do better. You're living with 100 amps. I bet that's no easy feat for a woodworker.
It's not. I like, for instance, my saw stop. I bought it with a 3 horsepower, 220 volt motor, and I swapped it for a 1 3/4, 120 amp motor. And so and it hasn't affected really my woodworking at all. But I just have this extra motor sitting there that I'm anxious to upgrade after my panel's upgraded.
You sure you don't want to sell the motor on the podcast? I bet there's lots of folks out there who would love your 3 horsepower DC motor.
I'd maybe sell the other one. I'll put it in the classifieds on Fine Homebuilding.
Jeff, you've been finishing your basement now for how many decades?
Well, it's more repeatedly then, right?
What do you think about the drop ceiling versus drywall argument?
I mean, I definitely, I have thought a lot about drop ceiling just because of accessibility, but a drywall ceiling is definitely a much cleaner and nicer place to live.
Yeah.
It's one thing if it's a rec room; it's quite a different thing if you're living there.
All right, Shane, let us know what you do, please. I just stay away entirely from the spray painting the ceiling like Ian suggested. That's going to be a dusty mess. It works in the commercial space because it's 20, 30 feet up in the air and no one can see it. But if you put your smartphone on Zoom and take a picture, and you'll see how gross it is up there. I guarantee it. Question 3 comes from Guy Divergis, who's also been on Pro Talk. He is a moisture intrusion consultant, groundwater, envelope leaks, and he was called to a project recently and for whatever reason wanted our input on it. Hello, podcast.
I think you wanted to kick the can down the road on this one, was what he wanted to do.
Right. Yeah, when you guys hear the question, you're going to maybe understand why Guy asked us, right? Hello, podcast crew. I recently inspected a new home that the owner complained had new window leaks. The windows did indeed leak, but the bulk of the moisture was from an irrigation heads wetting the brick facade daily. We opened up the wall, found moldy drywall, rotted stud, and as Patrick likes to say, composty sheathing. My question is this. There was no air gap between the brick and framing, nor any weep holes. This was new construction. Why would a mason not leave the airspace, the air gap? Are there other mason design guidelines not to use an air gap? Is it faster, cheaper not to have an air gap? Am I missing something? I recommended replacing all the impacted materials, sealing gaps and cracks, and water sealing the brick. Short of pulling a brick off and starting over, do you have any other recommendations? This is a $1.5 million house. Man.
If it's a new house, like new, recently built, I'd say you got to chase down the developer and the builder and the original masonry contractor before you really do much else. If it's not a new house and it's a couple of years down the road and he's referring to it as new to the person he inspected it for, I think you've got to do something to get rid of the lawn watering sprinklers that are showering it every day by switching to drip tape or something along those lines. Matt Reisinger has an article on the Fine Homebuilding website about how prevalent this is in Texas, where he is. I don't know where Guy is necessarily, but it seems that this is a problem in areas where brick cladding is common.
I want to say something about this that I'm not supposed to say on our podcast, but the second word is show. This is a huge problem. You need a 1-inch airspace behind brick veneer so you can have drainage and drying because, it's a reservoir cladding. It's going to get soaking wet, especially when you hit it every day with a sprinkler. And then when the sun comes out, it's going to send all that moisture into the building because that's the first condensing surface is that drywall. And if this house has house wrap and there's the mortar is in contact with the house wrap, it loses all of its water holdout capabilities. It is a huge problem. The real solution is to rip all this off and do it over again. No one's going to want to hear that, but it's a tragedy.
I'm guessing with it being a $1.5 million house, we're talking about a lot of brick.
Oh, yeah. So
maybe you could rip the brick off and put James Hardy siding on, and maybe it's in Massachusetts, and you could call one of the guys from the Boston Globe article.
Yeah, we don't do brick. We got nothing but problems with brick. I had a call, I don't know, a couple years ago from a gentleman in Houston, and he had a new commercial building built, and their brick mason, put up the brick, the mortar was in contact with a house wrap. It was totally degraded. There was places where there was no more house wrap. You could see where the water was creating a problem, and there's no good solution to this. When people who know what they're doing put up brick, they have excellent water management details behind it, right? The sheathing with its WRB and flashing materials should be completely watertight because of the solar vapor drive issue. And if you're being really conscientious, you should have some means to prevent the weep holes at the bottom of the masonry veneer to allow the water to get out. And one of the products is called mortar net, and that prevents mortar that's dropped behind the brick as they're laying up the brick from blocking all the weep holes. So it creates a drainage path, and it looks a lot like a thick layer of the Benjamin Obdike cedar breather, and it's arranged with like kind of a tooth pattern. So, if the mortar doesn't build up in a continuous dam, there are places where the water can get through it. And anyone who's not doing that on a $1.5 million house, I gotta question their judgment from a liability perspective, right? Why would you build a house that has this risky of an assembly? Why did it happen, Ian?
Because good brickwork is shockingly expensive. And if you're chasing that profit margin on developing these homes, you can run into people who will chase down that cheaper contractor. And there is a reason why they're less expensive than the high-end professional brick cladding installers.
So to answer Guy's question, yes, it is faster and cheaper to not have an air gap, and you should absolutely always have an air gap.
I think so. And you should probably rip it off and put James Hardy cement board siding on.
Gosh. This problem is not, limited to brick. It's a stucco epidemic in southeastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey. It's these reservoir claddings. Like somehow we forgot how to detail them to keep out water. I don't know.
In your Keep Craft Alive podcast with Travis, he did mention something about contractors sticking with the systems that they're accustomed to working with and not trying to use different types of claddings or systems in building science from other parts of the country that may not be suited for where you're using them for. And I think that's also part of the ethos stucco brick cladding issues that we see.
Like now we can see pictures of houses all over the country, like immediately. Whereas, before it would just be like you'd look in your neighborhood or across your city to see what other people have been building and doing.
Yeah, and there's a reason why some of those neighborhoods, like the one Patrick was in Massachusetts, all kind of look the same. As it's the building style that works and survives the long term in those areas.
Did you guys look at what's going on behind this disaster?
Yeah, they're horrific, like crash photos, and they're really bad.
And you can see in the photos, listeners, that like the house wrap, it's one of these cheap like woven wraps, and it's toast. It's been destroyed.
It makes you wonder how many other spots on the house are like this. You got to think a lot of the front elevation of the house where they would have a lot of plantings and a lot of watering going on.
And the south side is often worse too because solar vapor drive is worst on the south elevation. I mean, at a minimum, these folks need to get their sprinkler heads adjusted so they're not soaking this, making it worse.
Switch to drip tape.
Yeah, it's a bigger problem, I think, than irrigation. But I want to know, Guy, what did you recommend to these folks? I mean, like, and how did they react? I want to hear more what they said, because it's a shame. You buy a new house for, $1.5 million, and someone tells you weeks or months later, you know what, your house is rotting. Can you imagine what that shock is like? Kind of makes me sad. I don't know if I can go on. Well, I'm going to push through here. This is from Michael in Woodbury, Connecticut. Woodbury's a neighboring town. Hi, Michael. Stop by sometime. Hello, podcast team. I'm in the midst of a DIY gut renovation of our house in Woodbury, Connecticut. It's a 1948 Cape with a garage and connecting breezeway added at some point. The breezeway addition, like all the work done on the house, is exemplary of fine home building in the sense that fine means simply adequate. One of the finest aspects is the way the addition was attached to the main house by simply nailing the framing against the existing clapboard. See photos attached. The triangular gaps between the breezeway framing and clapboards have been filled over the years with caulk and canned foam, but much of it is broken loose, forming what my wife has dubbed a snake highway. We live in a wetlands area alongside a stream, and we have numerous species of snake neighbors who enjoy slithering through the gaps to enjoy mouse hunting in the ceiling insulation. We learned this during demolition when dozens of snake skins rained down on us. Michael, I would move. And of course, the roof leaks at this intersection. Before we started renovating, there was an aluminum siding on the main house over the original cedar clapboards. Unfortunately, the aluminum siding did lap over some step flashing at the roof's edge, but it was not well done. You could see daylight from inside the breezeway attic. And now that we've removed the aluminum siding, the step flashing is outside the clapboards and is useless. So where do we go from here? I think there is no viable way to fix the roof except to strip it off at least a foot or two of shingles at the intersection, do some surgery to yank out the old clapboard from behind the breezeway framing, extend the roof sheathing to the house sheathing, and then properly flash and reshingle this part of the roof and replace the removed clapboards with new ones. The walls are essentially the same story. I need to extend the breezeway sheathing to the house sheathing and then properly seal the connection. Also, I don't know if it complicates things, but I am vaulting the breezeway ceiling, so I need to cut into the house sheathing below the ridge to frame a post and slide in a triple 2x12 ridge beam into it. The other side, garage connection, is less complicated because the framing meets up conventionally, although the roof slopes are inexplicably slightly different, just to keep a guy scratching his head. Finally, a question. What's the best way to do this? Should I cut back the existing breezeway sheathing, roof and walls, a couple feet or more to give myself room to frame a proper connection? Or can I just slide some 1x material into the gap and rip narrow strips of plywood to cover it? In either case, how should I seal these new connections? Zip tape, caulk, silicone sealant, etc. Thank you all for considering my question and for producing an awesome podcast that keeps me motivated whenever a pile of snake skins threatens to break my spirit. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever wrote us.
This is like a Hall of Fame letter, I think. This is a great one.
Thanks for writing, Michael. What do you guys think? Can he just pull off the claps, slip some wood in there, flash it? What are we doing here?
I think that's one option. As long as you detail it right and get it well flashed, I don't see why you couldn't just go that route. I wonder if that's actually more work in a way than cutting back the framing and reconnecting it. In the photo of his roof, he's really got a lot of work to do there to make that right. I had a very similar intersection of an addition to my old house in Millbrook that it took a lot of work to get straightened out, and actually included ripping off most of the adjacent roof.
So, as one who's done something similar, what would you suggest?
On the roof specifically, I think he's got to think about re-roofing that breezeway connector. I'm assuming it's a small enough space that it shouldn't be that much work, but if he removes those clapboards and then re-roofs that breezeway, he can get a really nice, well-flashed, well-executed joint between that roof structure and the side of the house, which is an area I would be much more concerned about than the side walls.
Because of there's so much more water. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Jeff,
he can
Andrew,
add a
thoughts?
gutter and detail that wall intersection to keep water off of it and manage it with some good flashing details. And maybe you would actually want to use a combination of tape with some kind of copper or metal flashing over it. And he's in Woodbury. He could just go down the road to a hardware store and get, lead coated copper if he really wanted to go with the gold standard.
Jeff, Andrew, thoughts on this?
It's this age old question of, if you give a mouse a cookie, like, how far do you go? And it seems Ian basically redoing your roof the right way. Like, you do that, you get almost 100% of the way there of solving your issues. And it would like be terrible to do sort of the cut and cobble method to fix this, spend all that time doing it, and it's still not working. If you want the greatest chance of success, you gotta do the big project.
Yeah, I think in the hierarchy of importance that Michael has going on there, he's got to take care of that roof and make sure that that's as bulletproof and correctly executed as he can make it. And from his pictures, it looks kind of like he's well on his way to digging into it. And then,
I would say he's not scared to do some demolition,
exactly.
right? And that's the first part of this, is like opening this up to see what you're dealing with.
The other thing I would add is that roof, once you get it all torn off and get your clapboards removed, it's not difficult work to execute. He'll have a tricky detail at the ridge, but the rest of that's pretty straightforward stuff. And I think that's far more important than the wall.
We should remind, was it Michael?
Yep.
Michael, that you're supposed to keep siding 2 inches above the finished roofing material, right? Which leaves a 2-inch section of exposed flashing. So you need to make sure you buy flashing that's tall enough that allows you to do that. The temptation is to cheap out and go with something narrower, especially now with the prices of aluminum and copper and lead coated copper. He's not doing that, right? Yeah. What else? So does he need to get the siding out of the interior part of it, where the snakes are scooting in there? What are we going to do about the snake situation? I'm more worried about that.
I think some of that can be fixed with flashing if your connection from wall to house is good enough. Obviously, it'd be a great idea to get that siding out of there and fill it in with something that's easier to flash over, like a 1x, as he suggests himself. I would be concerned about the amount of work that's going to be, though, and whether or not you'd be better off just removing some of the wall sheathing and that first stud or two that's connected to the house to open it up even further.
I'm going to make a suggestion to Michael because, this is an opportunity to buy an oscillating multi-tool if you do not have one, and it would make this project a lot more enjoyable. And, why
an
resist
excellent ear protection. That's the other part of owning an oscillating multi-tool. Excellent ear protection.
One of my favorite descriptions of that tool, I was working with a deck building crew, and they called it the Buzzy tool for obvious reasons for anyone who's ever used one, which I thought was hilarious.
The other thing I would suggest, Michael, is Patrick's not far away from you in Greenwich. I think you should get him to come up there and give you a hand.
I was going to say I've got about 4 hours before I've got to leave for my flight. I think it's a small enough roof. We could knock this out this afternoon.
Absolutely.
Ian is getting me back for my introduction to this morning. Michael, I'd love to help you with this. I'm good at pointing and talking. I love our listeners. Thank you so much for writing in, everybody.
As an after-show guest. Michael should be on as an after-show guest, and he could do a little FaceTime Zoom call and walk us around this project, because something tells me this
awesome.
That would be so fun.
This is only the tip of the iceberg of what he's got going on there, I bet.
I can think of a half a dozen or a dozen regular listeners that I would love to have on the after show. Boy, if any of you folks are interested in that, please email the podcast, and we'll see if we can make it happen. I think, wouldn't that be fun? That'd be super fun.
That'd be so fun.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a home remodeling DIY project that's turned into a war on multiple fronts that you can walk us through. We really would love to see that and help you out.
And I hope Guy will update us on what his client said about their, weepy brick. That's a bad deal there. So, Andrew, we're supposed to remind folks about the after show. And do you want to talk about what we're going to be discussing today, please?
Yeah. So every week we get to talk a little bit more about some specific things that are interesting to us, let our hair down a little bit, have some real conversation. And the after show is available for members of Fine Homebuilding. You access it on our website at finehomebuilding.com. Just look for podcasts. And today we're going to talk about Patrick's trip to Boston and a fantastic historic community and a little bit of painting. So I think it'll be a fun conversation, and I'm looking forward to it. And as always, we appreciate everyone who is a member of Fine Homebuilding. Encourage everyone listening to subscribe or become a member. And we thank you all for your support.
I have a couple reminders for events coming up. The Touch of Trade in Kent, Connecticut is October 22nd, and it's meant to be an event to introduce folks to the rewards and fun of tradecraft. And we are going to have demonstrations where folks are going to get a chance to try various things. If any of you listening are interested in participating, I would love to hear from you. You can write the podcast email box, and we'll put you in touch with the right people. But I will be there, and I'm super excited about it because I love the work that I do, both my hands-on magazine making and building. And I feel like so few folks in today's modern era get a chance to try stuff like this, and this is an opportunity to get dirty and have some fun and learn more about a trade you might be interested in. So I hope you all will be there who are listening, and if you are a tradesperson and are willing to be one of our presenters, I would be super grateful and love to hear from you. Andrew mentioned it earlier, but September 14th and 15th in Kansas City, Missouri, the Midwest Building Science Symposium, and in Chattanooga, Tennessee on October 12th and 13th. So lots of stuff coming up. Good for the ongoing education we all need, and I hope you folks will let us know about events that you have of note in your area related to building and building science. Ian, any final thoughts?
No, I'm looking forward to hearing about the other two cities that they're doing those symposiums at.
Are we allowed to talk about where they might be, Andrew? Is that premature?
So there aren't dates, but there are tentative locations. So they're hoping to do one in Texas and another one sort of in the mid-Atlantic region later this year or early next year.
But don't let that prevent you from going to Chattanooga or Kansas City. 'Cause both cool places.
Very cool places, yeah.
Well, stay tuned for the after show. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today for the regular podcast. Thanks to Ian, Andrew, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us. However you're listening, it helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Marblehead, Massachusetts is actually a beautiful place.